Well, another 3 months has passed, and that means we have a brand new batch of 13F filings. These are SEC regulatory filings over in the United States that have to be filed by anyone managing more than 100 million US dollars. And they basically have to disclose what stocks they own. So for everyday investors like me and you, it allows us to see what people like Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger and Mohnish Pabrai and Spier have been buying and selling in the previous quarter. It's a great way to generate new investment ideas and keep an eye on what some of our favorite investors are doing. So in this video, I want to go through some of my highlights from this 13F season and have a look through what some of these super investors have been buying and selling. So if you do enjoy the video, be sure to subscribe for future content as well. But without further ado, let's get straight into the video. Now let's kick things off here with the GOAT, that of course is Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway, and as usual, a few things to keep in mind when we look at the Berkshire 13F. Now, if we look at the largest positions in the portfolio here, those are almost certainly going to be Warren Buffett investments, but we have to keep in mind there are a couple of other money managers at Berkshire, Todd Combs and Ted Weschler. Actually just recently did a video on Todd Combs if you're interested in that, and basically any smaller positions will be more likely to be Ted and Todd investments. I think combined they manage a little more than $30 billion at this point, maybe 15 to 17 billion each, somewhere in that range. So if we see, for example, a $1 billion or $1.5 billion investment, that's probably roughly a 10% position for Ted or Todd. But anything north of that threshold is almost certainly Warren Buffett. Now, looking first off at the top 10 holdings for Berkshire, we actually saw a few changes. So looking from top to bottom, and again, keeping in mind that Berkshire has quite a top-heavy portfolio, the Apple position alone is currently 41.9% of the portfolio. It gets obviously much smaller as we work down the list here, but Apple remains the largest position with no change. Bank of America is number 2 with no change. Chevron is one of the 2 oil companies that Warren Buffett has been buying a lot of in 2022, and in the latest quarter we saw a small add to Chevron of about 2%. Next up, we have Coca-Cola and American Express, 2 positions that have been in the portfolio for decades at this point, and again, no change there. But we did again see Warren Buffett continue to buy Occidental, the second oil stock that he's been buying a lot of in 2022. I've done a full breakdown video on Warren Buffett's Occidental Petroleum purchase, and have gone into a few of the more intricate details with that one. So if you're interested in checking that out and hearing about the warrants and other deals that Buffett has done around Occidental, definitely check that out. But we saw continued purchasing, and this one is pretty much as expected. We've been seeing not only 13F filings from Buffett around his purchases of Occidental, but we actually also see Form 4 filings, which is basically any time you own more than 10% of all the shares outstanding, you have to file any purchases or sales publicly and within a couple of days. So that's one that we've known about for a little while, but interesting to see Buffett continue to buy some of these very large oil and gas companies. Now, continuing to work through the top 10 here, we next see Kraft Heinz and Moody's with no change, but we actually see a couple of changes in position 9 and 10. So firstly, we've got Activision Blizzard trimmed about 12%. That's a little bit of a tricky one to interpret because I know that one of the smaller managers, Ted and Todd, owns Activision, and also Warren Buffett owns Activision. So who exactly is trimming that, I don't know. Activision is looking like it may get bought out by Microsoft, and Buffett spoke at the annual meeting about how this is essentially a bit of an arbitrage opportunity, or a workout as he called it, between the current price of Activision and the price at which Microsoft is looking to buy out the shareholders, so he can potentially capture a small gain there. So interesting to see him trim that about 12%. And probably the biggest move of the entire 13F filing for Buffett and Berkshire is a brand new position in Taiwan Semiconductor. It's immediately in the top 10 positions. It's got a market value over $4 billion, so likely a Buffett investment here. Unfortunately, I don't have too many insights on Taiwan Semiconductor, but that is a brand new stock in the Berkshire portfolio, and as I understand it, it's the first time it's ever been owned by Berkshire. Okay, looking at some of the other changes in the portfolio here, and keep in mind we're now starting to get into some pretty small positions, even though Taiwan Semiconductor, for example, is a top 10 investment. It's only 1.3% of the portfolio because those very largest positions represent a big chunk of the pie for Berkshire. But nonetheless, continuing to work down some more changes at the smaller end of the portfolio. We saw a couple of sales of different bank stocks. So Bank of New York Mellon was trimmed 14%, US Bancorp was trimmed 31%. Continuing down the list, we've got Kroger trimmed 4%. Paramount Global added to about 16%. General Motors trimmed 5%. Celanese Corp, which I don't even know if I'm saying that correctly, I believe that was purchased in the portfolio last quarter as well, and we've had another small addition of about 6%. RH, or Restoration Hardware, was added to 8%. I believe that's likely a Ted Weschler stock, just with his background and everything. That would be my guess there, but we don't know for sure. We have a brand new position in Louisiana Pacific Corp, another brand new position in Jefferies Financial Group, and finally we had one complete sale in the Berkshire 13F this quarter, which was a 100% complete exit of Store Capital Corp. Previous to this quarter, it was only a 0.06% position. So a small holding, but nonetheless, that was sold completely. Now, as well as the regular 13F updates, I'm also going to jump over to TIKR, which actually shows us some international regulatory filings. So this isn't guaranteed to show us every international holding that a company might have that wouldn't show up on a 13F, but if it's triggered some sort of other international filing, it should show up in TIKR. So for example, if Berkshire were to purchase 5% of a Japanese company, that triggers a regulatory filing in Japan, and that actually happened for Berkshire specifically a couple of years back. So jumping over to TIKR just to look for any of the potential international activity that may have been picked up, there's really nothing significant to report. However, if we go to one of Berkshire's subsidiaries, Berkshire Hathaway Energy Company, we actually saw that this is the subsidiary in which Berkshire holds its BYD investment. And there's been some news articles out recently about Berkshire starting to trim that holding after quite a substantial period of time and a massive gain in the portfolio. Again, I've done a video on Lee Lu's investment in BYD where I covered a bit of Berkshire's performance in that stock as well. But I'll put some numbers up on the screen here just to show you that Berkshire has been trimming that BYD holding. Okay, moving next to Warren Buffett's right-hand man, of course, Charlie Munger, whose 13F we can see via the Daily Journal Corporation. He does manage the portfolio for DJ Co, and it's one that's got a lot of attention in the past maybe year and a half, mainly because this is the portfolio in which we saw Charlie Munger purchase into Alibaba. And there was quite a bit of activity for a few consecutive quarters there for Charlie Munger, specifically around Alibaba, but for the past few quarters now, he's been really going back into classic Charlie Munger mode of just sitting back and letting the businesses do their thing. And we saw that really just continue on this quarter. So we saw no activity at all in the US portfolio. If we look through the 5 holdings that show up for the Daily Journal Corporation, we have Bank of America and Wells Fargo, which combined make up a little over 80% of the US holdings. We see Alibaba at about 14.5%, US Bancorp at about 3.5%, and then a small little position, less than 0.5% in POSCO. And looking over at the international filings on TIKR, we don't see anything show up here. I do believe that the Daily Journal Corporation has had a position in BYD as well for a long period of time, but they're a pretty modest size holder relative to the overall size of the company. So not large enough to trigger any sort of regulatory filing, so we don't get too much insight into what Charlie Munger has or hasn't been doing with that BYD position. So Charlie really getting back to what he's known for, and that's been the master of doing nothing. And moving to someone else who's starting to get a reputation for being the master of doing nothing, let's talk about Guy Spier of Aquamarine Capital. Now, again, in classic Guy Spier fashion, we see absolutely no action in the portfolio at all. If we look through the top few positions in the US portfolio, we see Berkshire Hathaway, American Express, Bank of America, MasterCard, and Ferrari Pabrai. And I'll put a screenshot up here of some of the other positions that you see in the portfolio, but no purchases, no sales. Guy Spier just sitting back and letting the compounding do its thing. Looking internationally for Guy Spier, we do see a couple of additional holdings, Indian Energy Exchange and TIKR. And again, I believe Guy Spier is a significant owner in BYD, but not significant enough to trigger a regulatory filing. So that doesn't show up in TIKR here, but with the two stocks that do, both in India, no change there at all. Moving along now to a good friend of Guy Spier's, and that is Mohnish Pabrai. We do see some activity for Mohnish this quarter. We actually see a brand new stock in his 13F filing. Now, if you look at the 13F for Mohnish Pabrai, it can be potentially a little misleading, because it only previous to this quarter showed two stocks. Now that we have an additional one in there, we're seeing three stocks in the US portfolio, which would lead you to believe that Mohnish Pabrai is extremely concentrated in his portfolio. And although he is a concentrated investor, he does have a lot of international holdings. So this definitely isn't the full picture. But to work through here, we have 92.5% of the portfolio in Micron, no change in shares in the last quarter, no buys or sells. We see a tiny little tracker position in Seritage. I was really expecting that to drop off in the last quarter or two, given he sold a lot of it and has written about, being completely out of Seritage. But we see a small little $30,000 position here for Mohnish, relative to his roughly, I think, 700 million in assets under management. That is not a lot to read into at all. But the most notable thing is we've got a brand new position, about 7% of the US portfolio, or about a $7 million position, in Brookfield Asset Management, which is managed by Bruce Flatt, an investor that Mohnish has actually spoken about a couple of times. Now, Brookfield is actually quite a large, diversified company with holdings in a number of different asset classes. It's about a $75 billion market cap as of recording the video, so don't have a huge amount of insight into exactly why Mohnish might have purchased Brookfield, but I do know that, like I say, he has a lot of admiration for what Bruce Flatt has done there, and I've heard Guy Spier talk about Bruce Flatt in a similar way as well. Now, looking internationally, again, I don't think this is the full picture for Mohnish. I don't think we've got all the international holdings here, but we do have a couple of additional ones, and some of them do have some portfolio activity. So the main one here is Rain Industries. That's a company that, again, Mohnish has spoken about in previous lectures. He initially bought it because effectively it was a PE of 1. It was extremely cheap, and he's held it for quite a period of time. And we saw Rain Industries have an addition in shares of about 18.3%. That is as of the end of September. So a good addition there from Mohnish and Rain Industries. And that's really all the adjustments that we see. We do see some other holdings in here with Edelweiss Financial, Racist Logistics, Suntec Realty, and Nice Holdings. On TIKR, it does show up as a sale in Nice Holdings recently, but that news came out quite a while back. That was as of towards the end of June this year. Next up, let's have a look at the portfolio for Li Lu of Himalaya Capital. And again, Li Lu is channeling his inner Charlie Munger and I guess Guy Spier here as well. And we saw no US portfolio activity. So this is what the portfolio looks like as of the last 13F. We have Micron, about 33% of the portfolio, Bank of America, or about 25%, Google or Alphabet at about 16 or 17%, Berkshire at about 14%, Apple at 6%, and another class of Google stock at about 5%. So if you add those two Google positions there, you're getting to north of 20% of the US portfolio. Looking internationally, we don't see anything else show up for Li Lu, but I am almost certain that he is another investor that owns BYD. And again, I've done a full breakdown on Li Lu's BYD investment here on the channel, so I won't go into that in too much detail in this video, but definitely go and check out that previous video on Li Lu's BYD investment if you're interested. Now to wrap this video up, I want to look at two more 13Fs of slightly less well-known investors, and the first one is Norbert Lu, and I actually just recently completed a 3-part series on some of Norbert Lu's best investments. In my mind, he is one of the best investors in the world, so I always like to pay attention to what he's doing in his 13F, and again, Norbert Lu does have some international investments as well, which we'll look at in a sec. But in the US, Norbert Lu did have a couple of changes, which is interesting to see. So we saw Berkshire and Ally Financial remain the two biggest positions at 47% and 32% of the US portfolio respectively. But down the smaller end of the portfolio, we saw two existing stocks have some adjustments. So the first one is Winnebago. This is one that Norbert Lu has owned since, I believe, early 2019. He trimmed that position about 13% after adding to it a similar amount only a quarter or two ago. So interesting to see a slight reversal, of course, with Winnebago from Norbert Lu. And finally, we have about a 60% add to Smith & Wesson. And although it's quite a significant add, it's still only less than 3% of the US portfolio. But interesting to see Norbert Lu continue to purchase that one. I'm starting to see some interesting write-ups on that company, actually. They seem to have spun off a more capital-intensive business, have a more capital-light, kind of higher return on capital business now, and they also seem to be repurchasing a lot of shares. And that story rhymes in many ways with Norbert Lu's investment in Countryside Partnerships, which kind of rhymed with the investment in NVR that he's very well known for. So possibly one to take a look at, but it's a pretty modest swing, I guess, in the portfolio for Norbert Lu right now. Now looking internationally for Norbert Lu, we see an additional 3 stocks turn up, which is Naked Wines, Countryside Partnerships, and Motorpoint Group. There's no recent portfolio change in any of those companies that I can see. The latest report we have is for June for Naked Wines and Countryside Partnerships, but I do know that literally within the last week, Countryside Partnerships was actually acquired, I believe, by a company called something like Vistra Group. I will put the exact name of that company up on the screen here, so I wouldn't be surprised to see either one, Countryside Partnerships just drop off the portfolio here for Norbert Lu soon, or potentially we see a holding in that new company, because one of the options in that acquisition was for Countryside Partnerships holders to get shares in that acquiring company. Okay, and final 13F I want to look at here is Rob Vinall of RV Capital. Again, a smaller, probably less well-known investor, but with a great track record in the sort of mid-teens compounding over a number of years at this point. But unfortunately, Rob Vinall has had a really rough 2022 in terms of performance. And I find it really interesting to see what these great investors are doing in times where their portfolio is not performing particularly well. So looking through the 13F for Rob Vinall, we see no new positions or no positions completely exited, but we did see some sort of rebalancing, reallocation kind of within the portfolio. So Credit Acceptance and Salesforce, which are the two biggest positions for Rob Vinall, were trimmed slightly. Wix and Meta had very, very small additions, but we saw a couple of reasonably significant additions to some other positions. So Carvana was added to about 37%, and Trupanion was added to about 12%. Carvana, obviously a very controversial stock at the moment, and if you want to get Rob Vinall's full thoughts, just go and check out his letters. Those are publicly available, where he talks about the underlying thesis behind Carvana. He did admit to making a couple of analytical errors on that one, but he said given the price has come down so much, he actually quite likes the odds at this point with Carvana. And internationally for Rob Vinall, I do know that he at the very least owns Prosus. I believe that to still be true. But again, not a significant enough position to warrant any regulatory filings. So that is my highlights of our fresh round of 13F filings from some of my favorite super investors. If you did enjoy the video, be sure to subscribe for future content and let me know some of your thoughts on these recent portfolio changes down in the comment section below. But that's it from me for this one, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.